You got to earn your liberation.
I'm well. I'm well. Glad to be back in Chicago. There's a migrant crisis town hall meeting tonight. So I'm going to go there and speak a little bit, hear from the people what's really going on because the country want to know. Me personally, I believe the migrant situation in Chicago and New York is being led by the federal government. They're spearheading this to basically erase black people politically. Chicago has the only predominantly black U.S. congressional district in the entire country. That's why Obama had a lane. Carol Moseley Braun had a lane. Most of your modern black senators, we've only had a handful that came from Chicago because y'all have the only predominantly black U.S. congressional district. So they want to switch that out for Latinos. That's why they're here, to replace us politically. I suspect that at some future point in time, if they're not already doing it, they're going to fast track the migrants in Chicago and New York to full citizenship so they can vote. And I wouldn't be surprised if they'll.
So Diallo, I know you said you wasn't there, but how big is that send them back movement for black people? I know they talked about the city proposing migrant housings in a school in Woodlawn or a hotel in Kenwood. And they talked about, 150 million is already going towards or set aside for Chicago's 2024 budget. But well, obviously
first of all, I have to talk about the stupidity of this of Dr. Fubar.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, as he did correctly stated about the Democrat, the voting bloc here. Why would, because when he says the federal government is generally right now, you have what branch of the fucking federal government? The executive branch? Because Biden wouldn't fucking be president if not for these black voting blocs. So how would it serve him to replace the black voting bloc, which is solidly Democratic? I live in which is solid. So you got a group of minorities that give you a loyal voter base every election. They put you over every election, and you're just going to randomly replace it with another voter base that historically does tend to start off Democratic, but it has a much stronger trend as they become educated, more affluent in generations to move Republican. Why the fuck with the federal government? What part of the fucking federal government is he even talking about? And this man, Dr. Umar, who claims he's a scholar and a Pan-Africanist, what fucking sense would that even make for them to do it? Now, I understand why the oppressors are evil. They're insidious. But when I look at their evil agendas, it tends to lead somewhere for some particular outcome. But he could just say the federal government, because black people with any kind of sense generally have a hostile view of the federal government, which is a fucking monstrous entity. It's huge everywhere, tentacles all over the place. So when you talk about a specific agenda from the federal government, where is it coming from? So that makes no fucking sense, because at the same time he accurately say you have these black voting blocs, they're all fucking solidly, loyally, and consistently Democratic for over half a century. So why would why would the federal government seek to upend that or replace that, especially the current federal government? If stupid either word, but even if the Republicans ran the federal government, the Republicans have the Supreme Court. What is it? They're appointed. They're not voted, so they can't. So let's look at the Congress, the House of Representatives, the Senate, and look at who the black folks in there. Like, why the fuck would the federal government want to blow up these black voting blocks? And then he never speaks to real shit. He never speaks to our real issues. He goes from, the dresses and gays, and snow bunnies. He never fucking, how can you be a member of a race, a scholar and a freedom fighter for a race that's under genocidal oppression, but every time you talk on an issue, it's something you literally pulled out of the ass of the right wing, out of the conservatives. So before we even talk about what's really going on with the migrant issue in Chicago, motherfuckers like him, that people who are concerned about African people, if they start to listen to and follow somebody like Dr. Fubar, they end up not understanding what is in the interest of African people. They're not understanding the ideology and agenda of Pan-Africanism, and not even understanding what the fuck our solutions or problems are. You're dumber for having engaged with this man and his assertions and his ideology, which is not Pan-Africanism, but it's Black Puritan, reactionary Puritanism. And I think if someone can go be as number one and everything you say goes viral damn near, and for somebody to be able to be on top and all these things he brags about, like I said, again, we are under the battered race syndrome, especially in relationship to our most prominent leaders. But I'm sorry, but I think that needs to be said.
I just quickly, I don't think I disagree with any of that. I think in that I agree that those points need to be made. I mean, this is ultimately my biggest concern as well, or at least similarly, is a similar concern. That my first thought was also, first of all, what is he talking about in terms of the Chicago Democratic machine would want to replace? I mean, that part, again, with Diallo's point, is immediately nonsensical. Then, I mean, Biden is an offshoot of Obama, who's an offshoot of the Clinton machinery, all of which has all kinds of support from that whole. I mean, so I just don't understand why. So instead of a critique of maybe the Democratic Party and its policies and its what it doesn't do for the Black community, to then, as Diallo correctly notes, to take the very right-wing talking point, starting with a thread, like an allusion to something correct, that this is born out of federal policy, but then to give no detail, to give no explanation, at least in what we're seeing there. So I'm hoping later on, maybe during the great build, there was some clarification. I don't know. But in terms of what we're seeing here and the frame being used to start his analysis, it seems all wrong. Yeah. All right. So just real quick, one other thing. I just want to highlight this other point, though. It's a disservice to call yourself the King Kong of consciousness, number one, all of these things. And then again, to Diallo's point, there's nothing in there that unpacks what Pan-Africanism is. To talk about Garvey in one sense and then to demean or to pitch yourself or to allow yourself to be pitted against the immigrant communities, when Garvey himself started his career in those communities, working his way up through South and Central America, building with Afro-Latinos and learning what was happening in those communities as he made his way up here to expand his work and to construct.
And he got deported.
And then, of course, he got deported ultimately because, well, for a variety of reasons, none of which was leading his people to a complete and total misunderstanding of, in this case, electoral politics in Chicago. But that's sort of my point. Anyway, the short of it, the long, now that I've made it long, really what I'm just trying to say is that there is this disservice being imposed on his audiences that is frustrating, and it's couched in a Black radical frame and symbol, but it's very white supremacist and conservative in its core.
I mean, so back to like a couple episodes again when we talked about like how the Breakfast Club and stuff like that, and you got to remember the reason why Umar would get on a Breakfast Club is so that he could paint the picture of that mass audience what Pan-Africanism is and how it's illogical, and then how Charlemagne is more of a logical political thinker, right? And so I mean, that's
And
just,
now that we saw, I'm sorry to cut you off, but you just reminded me, but now that we saw that great film, The Forgotten Occupation, about Haiti, and Charlemagne Perrault, formerly Peralta, I believe, or Peralto, from the Dominican origin, and his revolutionary Pan-African contribution to struggle, not only being suppressed, but used initially as a symbol to suppress further revolution, and now clearly the people have rehabilitated and returned that Charlemagne to his rightful status. And I need to learn more about the brother. But it's even more irritating now to see that name Charlemagne being further reduced and attacked by someone self-referring as the god, when people doing what others might call God's work are not only brutally dealt with in real life and lived experience, but then in image. So shout out to Alan Martin and The Forgotten Occupation, and to all the Cacos, I believe they're called, that Charlemagne Perrault was. Shout out to them.
So but Diallo, so what in terms of, again,
my bad. One more thing, because Too Black is right in the chat too, by the way. It's odd how Garvey's Pan-Africanism is being reduced to a reverse hashtag conclusion.
Entrepreneurship.
Well, not just entrepreneurship, but just Black American only. Like it's taking on this decidedly Black America only focus, and the immigrants are the enemy, and it's like this. It's a very odd approach to Pan-Africanism. All right, my bad. I apologize.
But yeah, so Diallo, in terms of, we know that people obviously brought him to Chicago, so there had to be some type of segment. But in terms of like maybe the movements or the leaders, like how have you been seeing this otherizing of immigrants and saying that these people are going to take our jobs? Again, I saw numbers about 100 million embark in Cook County's budget to care for migrants. And then so there's a load of money that's going towards these things to be used as propaganda or whatever. Go ahead.
The terminology is off. They're not migrants. They're refugees. Mm-hmm. They come from a country that's under siege by the United States. Since before the Obama administration. The United States has conducted coups d'etats. They have engaged in illegal economic blockades. They have ran the full playbook of the economic hitmen against Venezuela, against Haiti, against Honduras. These people are economic, military, intelligence apparatus, and ecological refugees that are victims of U.S. imperialism. So as African people who are also plagued by U.S. imperialism, racism, white hegemony, and capitalism, when we see other people engage or respond or try to navigate or endure the ravages of capitalism and white hegemony, we have to come at it from that perspective. If we find ourselves on the side of the xenophobes, the anti-immigrants, the bottom line is you don't respect the borders of an empire. You don't stand with the territorial integrity of an empire. The moment your territory engage in imperialist, colonial aggression, you no longer can justly talk about your border integrity or even your own national sovereignty. I don't think that our community is educated enough about the Bolivarian Revolution and the U.S. machinations in Central South America and the Caribbean. People don't come here because this is a great country. And for whatever problem you as a Black individual or Black communities that are ravaged by the manipulations and machinations of capitalism and white xenophobia, you will never be able to find solutions to any of the issues in your problem within the right-wing, reactionary, xenophobic, racist cadres. So even if you think migration is a problem, but it's not migration. When Black people left the South in droves, Northern Negroes were saying the same thing. There were whole articles in the affluent and amongst the, I was just reading about, The Warmth of Other Suns and other books that talk about the Great Migration. It wasn't great, and it wasn't a migration. It was an expulsion. It was $1 trillion land grab. So as we define things, we have to use the more accurate terms. Calling these people, well, the right wing calls them invaders. The liberals call them migrants. But we who are conscious have to say, these are refugees who are engaged in a justified or justifiable act of fleeing war zones, freeing targeted areas, freeing climate change. And the U.S. is the #1 driver of climate change and climate disruption, fleeing economic assassination. Or as what did the motherfucker say? We're going to make their economy scream. So
no, it's oh, my bad. Go ahead.
No, go on.
No, I was just gonna. I'm just saying that in agreement that when I hear those perspectives, it's giving that someone who has never had a conversation with an actual so-called migrant. But I think Diallo's perspective is better in terms of refugee. They don't have any understanding of the policies and the histories that led to these people making that horrific trek. Like the things people do to get here, to do the jobs that nobody wants to do at wages nobody wants to work for while paying taxes and being little rewarded for that as well, and then being used to be pitted against other colonized communities. I mean, it's crazy. So it's just a bad analysis. And again, I just want to emphasize one more time that he's doing a disservice to his audience. Never mind how other communities or other whoever might feel about what he's saying. It's his target audience that he's again doing a disservice to in terms of limiting their conclusions and their own analyses. He's
if you want to learn
All
about
right.
Pan-Africanism, don't go to Umar. Go to Dr. Layla Brown. She'll teach you more.
And I'm sorry, I do have to, because every time you ask me a question, I go on another. In terms of Black community and our responses, I have to say,
in Chicago,
as a person who's been Black all my life, none of African people's problems, the only migrants that are at the core of Black people's issues are the ones that came over on the Mayflower, or the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santeria. And so, but anyway, I'm saying that to say our problems do not originate with the so-called migrant crisis. It's not a migrant crisis. It's not a refugee. It's a capitalist crisis. It's a racism crisis. It's an ecological crisis. And for us to be calling it migrants, and I'm telling you, and I promise you, they could gather up every so-called illegal and ship them south of the border, and there would be no appreciable transformation of African people's conditions, because that is not the source of our issues. It is a symptom of the same thing that caused these problems are the things that cause our problems. And so we're at each other, and we're attacking these other vulnerable populations and other victimized and preyed upon populations, but that is not the source of our problems. They deflect, and it's this shit. Everybody walks around talking about divide and conquer and all this shit, and as if they're so well aware of it while being divided and conquered. So in terms of these groups, in terms of whatever migrant wave comes for as a result, every time when you want to look at the migrant population, you're looking at is a person from a place in the world that's being targeted by the U.S. government. And I say to I'd like to gather up every racist and every reactionary from Dr. Fubar to the MAGA heads and let them know, if you hate immigrants and you hate immigration, you should be anti-imperialist. You should be on the front line of the anti-imperialist struggle, because that is what causes and provokes mass migrations. If you did away with imperialism, and this number two, global capitalism, going over and forcing people to orient their economies towards exports and profits, as opposed to orienting their economy around meeting the needs of their citizenship. That's the number two driver. That's the number two driver. Militarism, imperialism, capitalism. And we've seen, like I said, you name the country. When Honduras, when Venezuela, when Haiti, when the Lavalas movement was gaining ground for the first time in decades, there was a reverse flow of immigrants where we had more Haitians exiting the United States to return under the Aristide government. Because in the early 90s, remember the whole Haitian AIDS, they're bringing AIDS here, the kind of shit they would say. And they were Haitians on inner tubes full of AIDS coming to America. And even movies like Waiting to Exhale or some of them other black movies, this whole Haitian AIDS.
But Diallo, what this got to do with Pan-Africanism? Pan-Africanists don't have no time to talk about Haiti.
Right. But exactly. That's what you got a so-called prince, our prince. We need to go ahead.
Over here talk about Haiti like you a real Pan-Africanist.
But
what's wrong with
remember,
you?
There was a reverse flow.
You?
For the first time in modern history, there were more Haitians leaving the U.S. and returning to Haiti. And then Bill Clinton, with his coup d'etat, a CIA-supported coup d'etat and exile of the president and the upending of the Lavalas movement. The same thing was happening in Venezuela. Venezuela was lending billions of dollars, sending resources to Hurricane Katrina victims, gave Haiti $3 billion under the Bolivarian literacy. They were moving in the same way Cuba was moving, not exporting weapons, but exporting physicians, giving out humanitarian funds. And the U.S. upended their economy, coup d'etat. And so, again, you didn't see Venezuelans leaving the country. Venezuelans from the diaspora were returning to their country to be a part of that movement. So in all these things, whenever black folks sit here and complain about refugees, especially refugees that are a byproduct of the very same ideology, the very same institutions, and the very same agendas that have us under a genocidal stranglehold, and we think we can join with the reactionary whites to protect our country because they're using our resources. They're gonna put up they didn't ballooning the police budget, and I don't hear shit about it. But they spend a bent nickel on the migrants, and they're counting and watching every penny while this city is hemorrhaging money, all these no bid contracts, people feeding all these parasites, feeding off the Chicago economy. And every time they, like I said, they spend a bit nickel, and even though they act like there's really literally people out here talking about them walking around just giving refugees stacks on stacks on stacks. And I know black folks been struggling in this city since before I got here. And you swear their problems, they were living in a utopia before the Venezuelans started begging on our street corners.
So let me ask y'all this before we go to the next topic.
I got something I want to throw in here too.
All right, I'm still gonna ask it. So Trump is being positioned as like pro-immigration, and he talks about like taxing the countries when their people come over, and it sounds similar to Reagan's position. And so it could be positioned that Umar is on the radical side, and y'all might be supporting Trump, and even both of the pig parties, right? So
wait, what? You said Trump is pro-immigration?
Well, I'm not saying he's pro-immigration. I'm saying he's using language to where he's supposedly welcoming them over, but charging the charging the countries that they came from, or stop sending funding from the countries that they came from.
Well, that's as ridiculous as his claim that he's going to have Mexico build his wall.
I mean,
Arizona is passing legislation to allow citizens to shoot migrants.
Well, one of Trump's quotes says, he says, so we're going to work out something where every time somebody comes in from a certain country, we're going to deduct a rather large amount of money from that we give them in aid. So again, he's saying not to send them back, but
that's not a pro-immigration policy.
I'm not saying it is. What I'm saying is, if it's positioned to where you sound like, because we on the internet, right? We're not in logical spaces. You sound like you're supporting immigration with Trump, and Umar is against it. He for the people.
There's no position of Trump that favors immigration. That's just not the
even
case.
That claim isn't in favor of immigration. It sounds more like a right-wing claim that we will make them stop sending us their citizens by taxing them, by punishing them economically, and we'll make them step up and do more to stop their people from coming up here. One, first of all, I would, he probably needs to revisit all of those CAFTA and NAFTA agreements, which mandate by law that you can't do anything that upsets the corporate outflow and extraction of money from these people's countries. So he can't do that. He would be taken to that private court of judges and charged with and put in some penalty for breaking that contract. He can't upset but the real thing is, of course, that it's not meant to support immigration. It's meant as a way to give himself a new talking point for the election, to stop what he's blaming on the other part of it is, if Umar and others would do their audiences a better service, they would remind people of the history of Bracero programs, et cetera, and the federal government's abuse of labor by inviting immigrants in when they want to undercut labor here and then forcing them out when they need a talking point to get themselves elected on a conservative ticket. So this is all a big hustle meant, again, to further all this confusion and divide and conquer, while ultimately wedding Black liberation almost exclusively to the whims of the United States and its leadership, which is just antithetical to everything both Pan-African and revolutionary in thought. My last point that I just wanted to make on this, to add to the levels of contradictions that Umar represents here, by calling yourself the number one on Breakfast Club and the number one on YouTube or the number one on the internet for consciousness is an enormous contradiction, because all that is a marker of how well you serve the algorithm and its largely white supremacist embedded ideology and its advertising requirements and demands. So it's almost a confession of sorts to say that my analysis is best suited to the most elite and prevalent white advertisers and ideologues in the country and on the internet, and that I think should cause everyone to take a moment and rethink what it is that he's advocating, and what approaches might be better addressed. So,
also, I mean, I think in the quote is what I guess what I was trying to set up, the suggestion that he is helping, or the U.S. is helping these countries, they're aiding them, and since we're aiding y'all should be able to take care of your people, not send them here. But since you send them here, we're gonna stop the aid. So I was more so of trying to explain or trying to push into highlighting the contradiction of what this aid looks like, why are you giving, and who's these countries. But go ahead, Diallo. You can respond.
Oh yeah, and U.S. foreign aid is corporate welfare. I think some people really envision, when they make these announcements about 200 million going here or $1 billion going to Ukraine, I think people really imagine crates full of US dollars being shipped over, and especially these ADOS and these reactionary payouts, who see reparations as nothing more than a cash fall. They're not sending money. They're paying U.S. manufacturers, U.S. contractors, U.S. organizations and institutions to provide products and services. So the money doesn't go overseas. And that's the thing when it was a big thing. Oh, they're sending all that money to Ukraine. I'm like, they're not sending money to Ukraine. They're giving money to U.S. institutional investors to send surplus ammunitions and shit that's already existing. So if you want to say, hey, give us our cut, they can send you some grenades. They can send you some missile guidance systems that they make even in peacetime. They spend the money on this shit regardless. And they stockpile these weapons and these munitions and these vehicles of war and mass murder. They stockpile them. So I think the average American is really confused about U.S. aid, even though NGOs and other international actors are even trying to school Americans that the United States is not this ATM for the world that's giving all this money to other people. And another thing, even if they were sending the money here, if you obstruct that money, doesn't mean the money's coming back. I mean, I engage with Black people here in Chicago that you would think before the current crisis, Chicago was a utopia. That all our problems start and end with these migrants sleeping outside of police stations. It's incredible to me that they just pivot on a dime. That they can redefine the issues and just have Black people what I call atrocity hopping instead of getting to the core. That's why radicalism is so essential. Radicalism isn't just about being militant, or radicalism is about understanding issues at their core and proposing and engaging in remedies also that deal with the core instead of just looking at this surface, because the surface, people are like, oh, shit is crazy, shit is chaotic. No, shit is consistent and shit is deliberate. It may be crazy and chaotic for us, but the power relationships, the hierarchies, and the flow of resources and the accumulation of capital with all this madness never accidentally reverses flow. It all flows and sustained in the same way. So this is not madness. This is deliberate, conscious, criminal activity, conspiracy. So that we just say, oh, this looks crazy because we get the fallout on the messy end.
So to my point, shout out to Double O African, the erstwhile producer of the program, who sent me this as a reminder of where all of this, first of all, is a reminder of where all this brilliant Pan-African analysis is actually coming from. And it's perfect that it was a discussion centered around Chicago, given that Chicago has provided some of the best economic analysis going back decades, particularly from the University of Chicago, that are now being represented brilliantly by our Pan-African King of Consciousness, King Kong of Consciousness. So let's check this out.
For example, at the obvious, immediate, practical case of illegal Mexican immigration. Now, that Mexican immigration over the border is a good thing. It's a good thing for the illegal immigrants. It's a good thing for the United States. It's a good thing for the citizens of the country. But it's only good so long as it's illegal. That's an interesting paradox to think about. Make it legal, and it's no good. Why? Because as long as it's illegal, the people who come in do not qualify for welfare. They don't qualify for Social Security. They don't qualify for all the other myriads of benefits that we pour out from our left pocket into our right pocket. And so as long as they don't qualify, they migrate to jobs. They take jobs that most residents of this country are unwilling to take. They provide employers with workers of a kind they cannot get. They're hard workers, they're good workers, and they are clearly better off.
So if you just dress that analysis up in some beautiful melanin and clothing, and then add that they not only come over here and those jobs that they take are being taken from the Black community, and you actually end up getting something worse than the Milton Friedman analysis of the problem, because at least Friedman was being more honest and accurate about why the ruling political and economic elite of this country have always managed the in and outflow of this so-called legal or illegal migration. They love this. And I just heard last night again in a presentation out here in these tree-lined streets from Diedrich Muhammad, some more discussion, briefly at least, of this very fact that most of the so-called most of the immigrants who are over here so-called doing well have already come from that position. They're the handful who get the elite visas and welcome packages and are coming from already established family or economic backgrounds, and they're used to describe, create a false reality around what is going on with immigration. And then the underclass of that, the undercurrent of that, is just described there by Milton Friedman. And then and Umar and the like are giving a completely upside down and backwards understanding of all of that. So anyway, thanks to the Double O African community, and I appreciate that clip being sent right on time.